our external environment is actually reflecting our internal environment. And what we're doing is we've totally disrupted the gut microbiome of the planet, which is soil. If you're interested in greenhouse gases or water quality or food quality or fishery beds, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff comes back down to how we're managing soil. And we've really just been in a chemical experiment for the last 120 years. And that experiment's unintended consequences are now coming to the forefront, and people are starting to realize, well, we can't keep food production like this. This is not how your father's always done it. It's not working.
From the Weston A. Price Foundation, welcome to the Wise Traditions podcast for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. We are your source for scientific knowledge and traditional wisdom to help you achieve optimal health.
Hey, Hilda here. Do you ever give much thought to the earth? We walk on it, raise animals on it, build our houses on it, and depend on it for sustenance. But some of us might not actually give it a second thought. This is an episode where we talk about why we need to. The soil is in trouble, and we need to look at how we can restore its health, to regenerate it and cultivate it in a way that is good for the earth itself and for each of us. This is episode 256, and our guest today is Nicole Masters. Nicole is an independent agroecologist, educator, and the author of For the Love of Soil. She is recognized as a knowledgeable and dynamic speaker on the topic of soil health. But let me set something straight right here at the outset. This is not a conversation for farmers. It is for each of us, regardless of where we live and what our livelihood is. Nicole helps us understand the part we each play in the health of soil. She tells her own story and how her passion for soil health came about. She discusses the toxic load that the world is bearing and how that also plays out in our health as well. Finally, she discusses steps for turning things around for the earth's sake and our own. Before we dig into the conversation, a quick shout out to our sponsors, Green Pasture. If you're looking for a way to help fill nutritional gaps in your diet and give your immune system a boost, check out Green Pasture products. Their fermented cod liver oil and high vitamin butter oil are a great natural source of vitamins A and D, as well as omega fatty acids. Boost your health today. Visit greenpasture.org to place your order. And Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail, organ meats, bone marrow, and intestines in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. Intestines, stomach, tripe, and other gelatinous parts provide concentrated amounts of connective tissue, undenatured collagen, probiotics, and other gut-specific proteins that are now absent from the modern diet. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. Welcome to Wise Traditions, Nicole.
Thanks for having me, Hilda. I'm really, really excited to be here with you.
Excellent. So we're going to start on a kind of heavy note, but this is an important thing for our audience to hear. Talk to us about your encounter with paraquat and what its consequences were.
Yeah, so when I was 15 years old, I was living in Hong Kong with my family. My father was a pilot, and I used to love walking around barefoot because, as you can hear, I'm a New Zealander, and I had cuts on the bottom of my feet, and I walked along the side of a ditch where they just sprayed paraquat, and within about 6 hours, I ended up in hospital. They thought that I had meningitis. My neck froze up. I had a fever. I didn't end up having meningitis, but one of the things they do when they think you have that is they give you a lumbar puncture. And what that did is it then introduced the paraquat, which is a residual herbicide, into my spinal fluid. And it sat there for 15 years. And so I was told that I had fused vertebra, C1, C2. I went and saw every single body worker you can imagine. So I feel like I've actually got a depth of experience in like Bowen and craniosacral and orthobionomy and acupuncture. I mean, you name it, I've been to see them. And it was when I was 30 years old, so 15 years later, I actually met a chemical detox specialist, and he used radionics and ran through a series of questions about, is this environmental? Is this a virus? Blah, 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 until finally he came down to, well, no, it's paraquat, because I had no idea.
Oh my gosh. Okay. So if I'm hearing you correctly, for 15 years,
Mm.
you didn't know what was at the cause of your problem.
No, no. So I had foggy brain, I had memory problems, I was really tired all the time. I had been like a competitive long distance runner and I was really good. I had a whole lot of medals and stuff and I just went from being really athletic to nothing. Like I did not want to partake in sports. I kind of went off the rails in my own life. I was no longer interested in just partaking. It just became this very and then everyone thought, oh, that's normal teenage behavior. But it wasn't.
Deep inside, I mean, with all that you were going through, you knew it was something else. And paraquat is an herbicide. I'm guessing it's something like a Roundup or something. Is that right?
No, no, it's quite different than Roundup, and it's very quick acting. It's actually the leading cause of suicide in third world countries because there's no antidote for it, and it's a really, really nasty way to die. You need to take enough to really kill yourself. So there were there was some cases in America of women poisoning their husbands and killing them using paraquat. And yeah, it's a very long lasting residual herbicide in the environment with multiple consequences. So in some places it's been banned. What's interesting is while many places in the world are banning it, New Zealand's lifted the ban on it. Go figure.
Oh, no. So is this where your interest in the soil began? I mean, 15 years after this incident?
No, no. And that was the interesting thing is my life has been dedicated to how do we get chemicals out of the environment and out of the food chain. And I had this poisoning that was in my body and I had no idea. And it really ties into my thinking around the value of intuition and how actually the subconscious knows a lot more than what our, main conscious brain does. So I think my body knew that I'd been poisoned. I just didn't know.
Oh my gosh, that's fascinating. You're right. There's a deep wisdom inside of us if we stop to listen, right?
Yeah. And so the doctor that I was working with, we did hyperbaric chamber intravenous vitamin C, and we did a couple of those sessions. So they basically put vitamin C into your body under pressure, and it pushes out chemicals and toxins. And I was so sick afterwards, like 10 days of just like this gray stuff came out my nose and it stank. And
Oh,
within those 10 days, I had full neck mobility. I had really, really tight muscles, and everyone told me it was structural. And then after doing that detox, all my muscles relaxed, and I was like, "Whoa, this isn't a physical issue. It's a toxin loading."
wow. Well, so let's pivot now and talk about the toxin loading of our soil. First of all, what's going on and why should it matter to us?
What is exciting for me right now is we're finally seeing soil health start to raise its head above the pulpit. People are starting to realize how valuable a resource it is and how much. I mean, some of my thinking really is that our external environment is actually reflecting our internal environment. And what we're doing is we've totally disrupted the gut microbiome of the planet, which is soil. So soil, if you're interested in greenhouse gases or water quality or food quality or fishery beds, it doesn't matter. All of this stuff comes back down to how we're managing soil. And we've really just been in a chemical experiment for the last 120 years. And that experiment's unintended consequences are now coming to the forefront, and people are starting to realize, well, we can't keep food production like this. This is not how your father's always done it. It's not working. So the Green Revolution is finally we're realizing the consequences.
Yeah, so it's like we're all guinea pigs in this chemical experiment that is
Mm,
leading to all kinds of problems. People think, oh, I'm anxious because I'm online too much, or
mm,
I'm depressed because, my child is sick. Well, but maybe there's something else at play that we're also not heeding. So you're
mm.
so you're kind of ringing the alarm bells to wake us up as part of this green revolution. How can we start to take action, Nicole? What would you recommend that we do first to reverse the trend?
I think there's things that you can do for your own health, but I think the major driver really is as consumers using our consumer dollars to choose better. And Western price that really are looking at not eating processed foods, but not eating industrially grown foods. So this whole argument around meat, it's not around cows per se. Like it's not the cow, it's the how, but it's how are those animals being grown and produced and raised. And so getting off that industrial food treadmill. So knowing your farmer, buying at local food markets, becoming interested in where do we get regeneratively grown food from. And just because something's got an organic label on it doesn't mean that it's not industrially produced. So it's starting to shorten that distance between you and what's happening out on the land, and meet your farmer.
Yes, I'm so glad that you said that just because it has that label doesn't mean that it's been produced on a small scale. Like in Whole Foods, I sometimes see these berries. I'm a big berry girl. I love berries. And it says organic. So I think, hey, that's great. But I know that they're monocrops of berries. It's done on this huge scale. And tell me, how does that damage the soil? What's wrong with that if it's organic?
Well, one way I like to think about soil is the way that we think about the human gut microbiome. So you imagine that you only eat one type of food for the rest of your life and what that does to your gut microbiome. Well, it's the same in the soil. If you're just growing monocultural crops, and even if that's alternating crops, so you're going to grow berries and then you grow, I don't know, corn, that has a major impact on the diversity of the microbiome, just as it does with our own human health. So, our human microbiome probably has 50% of the diversity that it used to have, and less specialized organisms that can really help you deal with stress. So as we start to lose that microbiome in the soil, we no longer have the enzyme producing organisms or the hormone producing organisms or organisms that are creating those vitamins. And so by breaking that gut microbiome, it has massive consequences for the quality of the food that we grow. And then producers are having to chase their tail by putting on herbicides or pesticides or fungicides because that gut microbiome is broken down. So just like in our own human health situation, I think 100% of autoimmune type disorders are related to your gut microbiome. And it's the same in the soil. So we break that down, now we're in a whole lot of trouble.
I see. So it's like that lack of diversity is making the soil sicker and sicker. And then instead of healing it and changing up the soil, we just kind of spray stuff on it.
That's right.
And it's almost like the pill that a person pops when they want to feel healthier, right?
Yeah.
But they're not doing anything to remedy the deep-rooted, going for the solution.
No, and if you look and think, a lot of the big agri-chem companies are also your big pharmaceutical companies. So Bayer, for instance, they're peddling the same stuff.
The same people who are, giving us the pills are giving us this like quick, quote unquote, solution for the soil that's not really doing us any favors.
Well, no, but it's a great business model because now you're going to need this pill and now you're going to need that pill because that whole system's become compromised. And it's a great business model, not for us, but yeah.
Do you think the people who have that business model are doing it intentionally?
Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we saw come out of that Monsanto case was that they're making up data. They know the impacts that this is having on either human or soil or microbiology or nutrients. They know full well what's going on. And yeah, more and more of these documents are actually coming out. I'm not a big conspiracy theorist. I hate that kind of stuff, but unfortunately, I think it's big business at play. And yeah, why would you stop the gravy train? And unfortunately, it's people not being connected to integrity or really wanting people and landscapes to flourish. It's just a business model.
Coming up, Nicole speaks further about how this big business model impacts the soil. And she tells her own story about something she picked up from the earth that set her health back for years.
You're listening to the Wise Traditions podcast from the Weston A. Price Foundation. We pause now to recognize our sponsors.
Many parents struggle to provide the nutrition their family needs for good health. The modern diet is lacking in essential nutrients, and common vitamins are often unreliable and synthetic. That's why Green Pasture Products offers fermented cod liver oil and concentrated butter oil that can help fill your family's nutritional gaps and provide a boost to your health so you can all thrive. Their oils are a great natural source of vitamins A and D and omega fatty acids. Our family takes Green Pasture fermented cod liver oil regularly to round out the diet. So go to greenpasture.org and place your order today. And this episode is brought to you in part by Grass-Fed Intestines with Tripe by Ancestral Supplements. Ancestral Supplements makes New Zealand-sourced nose-to-tail, organ meats, bone marrow, and intestines in simple, convenient gelatin capsules. According to the great John Fire Lame Deer, the eating of guts evolved into a contest. Quote, "In the old days, we used to eat the guts of the buffalo, making a contest of it. Two fellows getting hold of a long piece of intestines from opposite ends, starting chewing toward the middle, seeing who could get there first, That's eating. Those buffalo guts, full of half-fermented, half-digested grass and herbs, you didn't need any pills and vitamins when you swallowed those. End quote. Intestines, stomach, tripe, and other gelatinous parts provided concentrated amounts of connective tissue, undenatured collagen, probiotics, and other gut-specific proteins that are now absent from the modern diet. So visit ancestralsupplements.com to see what they can do for you. Ancestral Supplements, putting back in what the modern world has left out. This is Holistic Hilda, and you're listening to Wise Traditions. So here I am, just one person. Let's say I know my farmer, but I still want to do something on a bigger scale to turn things around, because won't our dollars and won't our choices impact that business?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And if all the consumers turned around tomorrow and said, that's it, I'm only buying regenerative foods, those big companies will scramble to make sure that's happening. And we're seeing that happen on a pretty big scale now. I mean, you see General Mills and Danone and Ben & Jerry's and, all these kind of Patagonia, these kind of companies that are providing food and fiber are now engaged with the regenerative story. My concern is they're going to greenwash it like they did with organics. But yeah, how do we keep integrity into that system? And part of that is actually looking at what is the output, because regenerating landscapes is about the output. Are we increasing the quality of the water that's coming off a landscape? Are we increasing water holding capacity? Are we increasing microbial diversity and the food quality that's coming off a property? So some of the operations I work with are measuring things like biodigestibility of grains. They're measuring nil residue of chemicals. They are measuring increases in, say, omega-3 or trace elements or vitamins in their actual the food that they're producing. And so that's what I want to see, is actually we start to get down to, what is this food quality? Can we actually improve the quality that we're buying? And, there's a few spectrometers and different types of meters that are actually being released last year and this year that are going to be ones that consumers can actually hold and measure for themselves what is the quality of this produce, which is exciting.
That is exciting. I've heard of the Brix meter, I think it is, that measures the amount of minerals and such in the soil itself. But explain how these new meters are going to work that consumers may be able to use.
Well, so Brix actually measures the dissolved solids in the sap of a leafy plant. So we're using that as a tool to look at how much sugar and dissolved solids, how well is that plant photosynthesizing. So it's an indicator in the field. Whereas these new meters are new infrared spectroscopy. So they're looking at, they actually need to be correlated with those specific crops. So at the moment you can test maybe 20 different crops, apples and pears and kind of those obvious ones. So there's a lot of calibration that's still required to test it. But some of these new meters will actually tell you where in the world was this grown, which is kind of cool. So people can actually correlate that this has come from this property. So it's technology that's been used for a while, but now it's a hand meter.
I can just picture us now walking around farmers markets with
totally
this little thing and being like, hey, wait, you said this was grown in Virginia, but I don't think so.
Yeah.
Starting some pleasant little encounters. But how do you know all this stuff? I didn't even go into your background. Talk to us about how you have come to this place where you are today.
So I'm an agro-ecologist. I have a background in ecology and soil science, which I finished in 1999, and I went off to manage community gardens for a while, and then my father bought a property, and I would have been 25, and I was a single parent, and it's not easy finding work when you're a single parent in rural areas. And my father actually helped me buy a deceased worm farm estate. So I got into commercial vermiculture and got really interested in the microbiology of what I was creating and how to create different types of blends of like worm castings for, an avocado producer compared to a strawberry producer compared to, pasture. So no, it just feels like I didn't even know I had a name, like that agroecology was a thing until maybe like 10 years into my career. And I was reading some research papers and I was like, oh, wow, that's me. I didn't know I had a title, like it just kind of evolved into what I was passionate about. And, when I left school, I had no idea what I wanted to do. Certainly didn't know it was going to involve soil. But yeah, once I discovered soil, it just never got dull, because as you can see, like you can relate that to the human aspect or the animal health or, greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, it's incredibly exciting.
It is exciting.
Yeah.
And talk to me, when you mentioned greenhouse gas emissions, I couldn't help but start thinking about climate change and people thinking they need to eat less meat
Mm.
or go vegan to heal the planet. What do you think of all that, Nicole?
Well, that whole argument, and I get that people are feeling overwhelmed and they really want to feel like they're making a difference. But the problem is the industrialization of food. So going vegan, if you continue to eat industrial food, you're just as big as a problem because you're then eating soya products, you're eating processed products that come from, I don't know, barley or something, instead of looking at how do I eat local. And a lot of beef is raised on land that would never be suitable for crops anyway. So a lot of the statistics that you see about meat are all based on what happens in a CAFO. Well, I don't eat CAFO meat. I'm not interested in eating an animal that's basically been sitting in a yard its whole life.
What would you advocate instead then? If I literally came up to you and said, guess what, Nicole, I'm going to stop eating meat. I'm just going to buy all my stuff from Whole Foods.
Mhm.
And you were like, okay, no, no, no. And you explained to me that that's not very helpful.
No.
What would you suggest I do instead?
Well, I guess it comes back to what people's reasons are. Are you doing that for your own health, or are you doing it for, so there becomes a whole lot of different arguments. And I guess you asked before about the greenhouse gas aspect, and it hasn't really been discussed. Most of what we're seeing in terms of this volatility with atmosphere and climate is due to land management. It's not because of fossil fuels, although that would be great. Let's reduce those. And it's how are these landscapes now functioning? And so if you have animals that are confined, they're not on green grass, that methane type process is actually taken care of under green grazing systems, especially where we are sequestering carbon into the soil. There are methanotrophic organisms that eat methane because methane's a food, right? It's not going to go to waste. And there are also what we call these hydroxyl radicals, which are formed off green growing grass with a bit of moisture. They react with the methane and turn that into carbon dioxide. So the whole process with livestock is actually a distraction. There's no extra net losses or net gains in terms of, well, there could be a net gain in terms of livestock management. It's how are we managing landscapes. So what we're seeing is landscapes are becoming water repellent. They are emitting much more greater amounts of greenhouse gases and have been since we began farming or ranching on many of these landscapes. And that's actually altering the climate. So if you look at, Australia is not a great example, a horrific example of what happens when that whole water cycle breaks down. So soil and water and carbon are all intimately related. And as we start to break down those links, there are consequences above ground. And we're seeing that in regions all across the world. So it comes down to how do we start to nurture and develop that gut microbiome in our landscapes to get that atmospheric response.
I want to go back to what you said a moment ago about how there are bacteria or, little bugs that eat the methane, which is actually a food. I'm like, why is no one talking about that? Is this too intellectually complicated for us? Like, why is no one talking about it? Do we just like simple answers? Is that what it is? I can't figure it out.
It's so complex, and this is a good thing of coming from an ecology standpoint, is it's a whole systems issue that we're dealing with. And when they go and do research, they go and let's look at a cow. How much methane is it emitting? Oh, bad cow. Instead of actually, how does that work in nature? And what is that system in nature? And, they went after the Gulf of Mexico oil spill, they went in a year later to find out what was the fate of that oil. And what they found was all these methanotrophic organisms were gobbling away. Like they were just like, oh, this is awesome. Now, yes, that oil spill obviously had massive consequences at the time and impacts on everything, but those organisms are going to come in. It's food. It's carbon. So methane is a carbon source. It's food for life. So they're not going to let it go to waste.
Wow, this is fascinating, even though it is complex. I like how you're breaking it down for us. And I want to ask you, you wrote the book For the Love of Soil.
Mm-hmm.
Who was your target audience for that book?
More specifically, when I wrote it, I wanted it to be for producers. So how is it that we can start to triage and diagnose what's happening in our landscapes and how can we rehabilitate? But I tried to write it in a way that keeps it really readable and using people's stories and really conveying things. And so a lot of people that are reading it are actually living in cities and are contacting me and going, I didn't know how my food was being grown. I didn't know these things were happening and how that impacts on them living in the city. And so, unintentionally, I think it actually is appealing to an urban audience to understand, well, these are the chemicals that are being used in agriculture, and this is what is in your food chain, and here's what people are doing on the ground. And just to get really inspired and go, wow, there's actually a very there's a massive revolution happening right now, and it's incredibly exciting to kind of travel the world and see the uptake of regenerative agriculture.
It is exciting. And is that why your last chapter is called The Future Is Now?
Yeah, I used a quote in there from Stephen Jenkinson who talks about hope, and like hope is mortgaging the future. Hope is something that you hold out as some kind of comparison, something that you're going to cling to and pray for, as opposed to actually what's happening is happening now. We need to be focusing on the things that we can do now, and hope is the other side of hopelessness. I mean, we go from feeling overwhelmed to maybe something's going to the knight in shining armor is going to kind of roll up. And this has been the excitement of, I guess, writing the story and interviewing so many producers, if they are there's market gardeners in there and ranchers and broadacre farmers, and talking about what they're doing now and how many of them have been doing this for decades, and they've got really great data and experiences to back up what they're doing, to say, actually, we don't need to be on the chemical treadmill and we don't need to be doing all these things. That actually it's not working, and we've already got the solutions now.
That is a good word of encouragement, because sometimes when we have these conversations, we're like, oh no, everything's falling apart. We're killing ourselves. So I like that you ended your book on a hopeful note, and I'd like to end this show on a hopeful note. I want you to answer the question, if the listener could do one thing to improve their health, or maybe even the soil health, what would you recommend that they do, Nicole?
I think for human health, the one thing that we can do immediately is to start taking care of our gut, because obviously our gut is affecting our thinking and our hormones and everything else. So I take fulvic acid every day, FULVIC. So we use fulvic acid in agriculture. What it does is it feeds the soil gut microbiome. It's a chelator of heavy metals, and it's a chelator for toxins. So when you take it for yourself, it relaxes the gut villi. It helps to restore the tight junctions in the gut. And if you think, nearly all the disorders that we're dealing with come down to the gut. It's extracted from soft brown coals. So it's ancient, decomposed organic matter that's full of different types of bacteria and fungal proteins, or we call these the quorum signals, but they are the proteins that biology use to communicate with each other. So taking a little bit of fulvic acid can actually help restore that whole gut function. And if you have a functioning gut, then everything becomes possible. There's so much more that we're able to do because you're not tired all the time and you're not full of toxins. And so it's part of my daily regimen if I'm thinking about human health. And then if you are gardening, then it's actually and I don't sell product, so I'm not trying to push product, but it's something that we can use in our garden to do the same thing. So it'll grab hold of toxins and heavy metals, and it'll feed your beneficial microbes.
Well, that leads me to one final question about the paraquat in your system. Do you think you've detoxed it completely? Is it out of your body?
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah, my life is like, it was like before paraquat and after paraquat.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for joining us, Nicole. You've had some valuable insights, and I'm grateful for your time.
Thanks, Hilda. It's been really fun.
Our guest today was Nicole Masters. Visit her YouTube channel and integritysoils.co.nz for more resources. And I'm Hilda Labrada Gore. You can find me at holistichilda.com. And for the show notes for this and every podcast episode, visit our website, westinaprice.org, and click on the podcast page. And now for a letter from a recent journal. As a dancer, I always struggled to maintain my energy levels and my physical and mental health. My health hit an all-time low the summer before my senior year, while I was living in Phoenix dancing with Ballet Arizona. I was attempting raw veganism, and I grew very thin and had no energy for ballet, let alone energy to put toward living a vibrant, joyful life. I searched for answers, and finally I discovered the Weston A. Price Foundation. I spent last year recovering by applying the Foundation's teachings, and my life has dramatically turned around. I have never experienced such vitality and happiness in my entire life. I am so grateful for WAPF. I have become so passionate about physical and mental health as well as farmer rights, and I'm so eager to become involved in sharing knowledge about these things. That's Eden from Leesburg, Virginia. Eden, thank you for your testimonial. I loved hearing your story. Each of you is welcome to write a letter to the editor that we might include it in an upcoming journal. And you can also rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts so that we might read a shout out of yours as well. Thanks so much for listening, my friends. Stay well y hasta pronto.
On behalf of the Weston A. Price Foundation, thanks for listening. We have many free resources to support you on your health journey. Visit westonaprice.org to find podcasts, articles, videos, and more. You can also find a local chapter near you for help in finding sources of great food. We invite you to support the Foundation's mission of education, research, and activism by becoming a member. Thanks again, and take care. Wise Traditions is a project of the Weston A. Price Foundation for wise traditions in food, farming, and the healing arts. The content on this podcast is provided for informational purposes only and is not intended to substitute for the advice provided by your doctor or other healthcare professional. It is not intended to be, nor does it constitute healthcare or medical advice.